Is he crazy? Is he crazy? Is he going out of his mind? A 360-day calendar? You've lost your mind, bro. You are insane. I know that there are a chunk of you out there that are saying that. You're like, what the hell are you talking about? A 360-day calendar? That's not even possible. The Earth has been going around the sun for 8 billion trillion years, exactly how it's been going forever. It can't possibly ever be moved, and the year has always been 365 days and a little bit over. Really? So, the Earth has never dealt with any cosmological events in over, 3 or 4 billion years? Really? So that is the mainstream story. The mainstream historians and cosmologists or scientists or whoever, whatever field you want to talk about, they all maintain that the Earth's orbit has not changed at all for billions of years. That's it. Earth has been doing this for billions of years, and all the insane stuff that happens in space all the time never happens here in our solar system magically. And I say magically because you literally have to believe in magic if you think that we have not been affected by all the stuff in space over the course of several billion years. First of all, that's insane, right? Every time I see some sort of article dealing with cosmology, they are always talking about some sort of weird crazy thing they found going on in space. And it's amazing that they found it and they weren't expecting it. Blah, blah, blah. All the time. They find that stuff all the time. But apparently, all that crazy stuff that goes on in space never happens here. Never. Just our solar system is 100% immune to anything that goes on in space. All right, so that premise in and of itself is ridiculous. Obviously, our solar system obviously would have had to have gone through something. We are not magically immune to all of the cosmological events and laws, etc., whatever, that exists all around us. Of course, our solar system has been put through the ringer. Even more interesting, all you have to do is look around at basically every single planetary body that exists in our solar system, and you see the scars of just ungodly amounts of destruction. And you see that destruction not only on other planetary bodies, but you see it here on Earth as well. And you can state this fact to a cosmologist, and at the end of the day, they will have to acquiesce, because the destruction is everywhere, right? But what the cosmologist will then start to talk about, or what he'll hide behind, is that the cosmologist will start to say, oh yeah, well, everything was like back in billions of years ago, or hundreds of millions of years ago before humans were around, and blah, 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 blah. Everything takes place billions of years ago in cosmology. Here's the problem with billions of years ago in cosmology. If everything takes place way back in a time where we essentially can never, ever truly know what happened, your claim is unfalsifiable. Now, this is the problem with mainstream cosmology. Pretty much all of their claims with respect to any kind of a historic situation regarding our solar system, it's all unfalsifiable. There's almost nothing we can do to challenge their particular point of view when it comes to cosmology. Because the second you try to say anything that goes against the hundreds of millions or billions of years theory, I don't even want to call it a theory, it's just an idea really, but if you try to challenge that with real evidence, they just say you're wrong, and they can hide behind the fact that everything took place billions of years ago, and they're right, but they can never truly prove it because it took place billions of years ago. So they're just right because they say so. This is a problem for us in the historical research arena. Why? Why am I even talking about cosmology when really we're focusing on ancient history? Well, in this little series, we're talking about calendars that were different in ancient times. So this particular series, I'm just talking about one of the several different calendar years that humans used to have. In this instance, we are talking about the 360-day calendar. which puts us in the realm of cosmology. So we have to discuss cosmology if we are going to understand aspects of ancient history. Now, we're talking about calendars. This is directly related to cosmology, right? I mean, calendars are literally cosmological in their basis. We today track our movement around the cosmological body, the sun, to give us what we call our year, right? So that's, cosmology is an integral part of everything we're going to do in historical studies. However, cosmology is very rarely, if ever, factored into mainstream historical research. Why? Why is this whole aspect ignored? This is a legit question to ask our ancient mainstream historical researchers. Why is cosmology always taken out of the equation when it comes to answering questions of events that may have taken place in ancient history? Now, if you just thought, well, sometimes they talk about comets, you're right, they do. Every once in a while, we will get a brief glimpse of a comet. But then look how quickly those researchers try to explain away the cometary body as if it's basically nothing. It's like, yes, comets exist. The people back then were dumb, didn't know what a comet was, so they just thought it was like a portent or a god or whatever. That's what they thought about it, and then we move on, right? They never look into it any further other than that. It's always just hand waved, even though the historical texts that they are probably reading don't take that approach to the comet. The works that they're translating probably take that comet pretty dang seriously. Not only do they take it seriously, but it literally affects and influences all of civilization. This fact is, of course, ignored by your general historical researcher. Now, this is a very serious problem. If we have historical researchers ignoring evidence that is right in front of their face that may explain what's going on, how can we trust anything else that they do? If they won't even look at the facts and the evidence right in front of them when they give you, their summation of the work or whatever, why should you, as an honest researcher, take dishonest research seriously? And that's the crux of our problem. A lot of ancient research that now exists in the mainstream zeitgeist is probably either half wrong or completely wrong for no other reason than the people doing the research and trying to figure everything out are simply being misled in the form of not wanting to take cosmological events into consideration when they try to figure out what's going on. And the reason they go that route, because the people that they would depend on for the science, the mainstream cosmologists, they are also living in some sort of weird magical fairy tale land. So basically, if you want the truth, we're screwed. I mean, we are screwed from like 8 different directions if we're trying to figure out what actually happened in the past. Now, one of the strange and interesting things that we find as we start to look back at ancient cultures is that we discover that everybody had different calendars from what we have today. Why is this? Why is it that we find ancient cultures all over the planet? I mean, everywhere, across the oceans. Everybody, for some weird reason, tends to have different calendars. And it gets even weirder when you start to see that the different calendars that ancient cultures used back in the day, they all tend to line up with one another relative to the year cycle. So here we're talking about a 360-day calendar that existed just a couple of thousand years ago, that number I'm sort of taking into account chronology, sort of not. We'll just use the 2000 year. It's around the time. Anyway, but what we see is that cultures all around the world at a very specific time suddenly have a 360-day calendar. Now, the 360-day calendar is not the only weird calendar that we find in the past. There are a couple of others that we find in the past as well. And once again, the further back we go in each of the cultures, each different calendar year tends to sync up with themselves. So we find ourselves with two main problems when it comes to calendars in ancient history. The first problem is the fact that there are different calendars at all. Now, mainstream historians will immediately fall back on the excuse of, oh, it's just some crazy religious practices. I mean, look at them. They're even doing it now. See? It's their tradition. And they'll say that with this absolute authority, like they've got it all figured out. Of course, when you go and actually look at the cultures today practicing or at least still remembering their old calendars, they don't take this as a fictional, like just a religious experience and haha, wink, wink, we know it's not real. No, they take it seriously. It is a remembrance of a time that has since passed. There was a reason why that particular calendar came into being. Now, the second interesting problem that arises from the calendar situation is that not only do we have weird calendars, but we have these calendars syncing up across the planet. Now, why would they sync up across the planet? There's really only two explanations that could explain any kind of synchronicity. The first explanation would have to be diffusion, right? You would have had to have had some sort of crazy, huge, worldwide, global society to where everybody was in communication so that the calendar could propagate across the planet. Like, you would have to get people talking. Now, this is, of course, a problem for mainstream historians, because mainstream historians, once again, like to say that everybody back in the day was just dumb, right? There's no way that these people were sailing across oceans en masse, etc., right? Nobody was talking to each other. Everybody developed independently, blah, blah, blah. All right. And then you will have the historian side that will say, no, there was some communication maybe here and there. You know, people sort of got in canoes and sailed across the entire Pacific Ocean using stars, but they were dumb, but they were able to sail across the Pacific Ocean using stars and canoe. You know, it's just, okay. So anyway, basically diffusion, I get it. It's a hotly debated topic in mainstream history, but at the end of the day, we know there's another answer. And the answer is unbelievably simple and right in front of every single person's face. And that is this: that every single ancient culture that was on Earth back in those periods of time saw the exact same thing happening in the sky above them, right? They all saw the same cosmological events playing out above them. I mean, it's that simple. Not only is it that simple, but they even tell us that this is exactly what happened. So, that leads us to the 360-day calendar. You like that? 12, 13, 15 minutes of me babbling just for another introduction into another part that we didn't even need to probably introduce ourselves to? Yeah, okay. So, let's go back with Velikovsky. I'll start reading some of his stuff, and then we're going to go over, well, we'll see what happens, as I have wasted way more time than I was expecting. All right, let's get back. So we are going to pick up where we left off from the first part of this series. Velikovsky, I'm just doing a quick reading of Velikovsky and how he goes over the various cultures who are rocking a 360-day calendar. So right now, we're talking about the Babylonians, where we left off at. The old Babylonian year consisted of 12 months of 30 days each, the months being computed from the time of the appearance of the new moon. As the period between one new moon and another is about 29 and a half days, students of the Babylonian calendar face the perplexity with which we are already familiar with in other countries. Months of 30 days began with the light of the new moon. How agreement with astronomical reality was affected, we do not know. The practice of an intercalary period is not yet known. It appears that in the 7th century, 5 days were added to the Babylonian calendar. They were regarded as unpropitious, and people had a superstitious awe of them. Now, when he says 7th century, he's talking 7th century BCE. And this date, of course, is the date that lines up with the Mars event. The Assyrian year consisted of 360 days. A decade was called a saris. A saris consisted of 3,600 days. The Assyrians, like the Babylonians, had a year composed of lunar months, and it seems that the object of astrological reports, which relate to the appearance of the moon and sun, was to help determine and foretell the length of the lunar month. If this be so, the year in common use throughout Assyria must have been lunar. The calendar assigns to each month 30 full days. The lunar month is, however, little more than 29 and a half days. It would hardly be possible for the calendar month and the lunar month to correspond so exactly at the end of the year. Assyrian documents refer to months of 30 days only, and count such months from crescent to crescent. Again, as in other countries, it is explicitly the lunar month that is computed by the Assyrian astronomers as equal to 30 days. How could the Assyrian astronomers have adjusted the length of the lunar months to the revolutions of the moon? Modern scholars ask themselves. And how could the observations reported to the royal palace by the astronomers have been so consistently erroneous? Now, this is where things get pretty interesting. Why? So, during this period of time, this is where everybody is using the moon to calculate a year. Now, according to all of these ancient cultures, the moon had essentially a perfect 30-day rotation around the Earth. It was so concise that they were able to calibrate calendars to the moon, right? Lunar calendars are prevalent everywhere during a certain period of history. This is not debated. The problem is that mainstream historians just throw this away as craziness or whatever excuse they make up nowadays, because it doesn't line up with what we see today in the moon. So as was just mentioned, the moon right now has like a 29 and a half-ish day rotation around the planet. If you were to try to make a calendar, like right now, you go outside and you try to make a calendar based on the moon, you would be off pretty dang quickly, right? Your days and your seasons would very much be thrown off after a couple of years, because you'd be accumulating all of that extra time as you did your calculations using a 29 and a half day moon cycle. You wouldn't have a nice perfect 30 days. Now, the question I have is, how the heck did we finally get, or not finally, but how did we get a perfect 30-day moon? This question matters for several reasons. The first reason being is that the moon was not always used as a calculation for the year. You have to remember, when the moon is used as a calculation for the year, it's only used during a certain period of time. It is not used like way far back in ancient times. Nobody cares about it back then. And what's even more interesting, the moon doesn't even seem to really exist at a certain point in history. Now, that's also another problem that's very interesting. So, when we start to talk about catastrophism and we start to deal with the moon, we would think that the moon is also experiencing all the crazy stuff that Earth is. And the moon being, a decent sized body in the sky. No, it's not the biggest thing, but it's still big enough to where it's going to be slapped around a little bit. And it certainly was slapped around. Have you seen the face of the moon? Yeah, the moon was absolutely destroyed. Anyway, but the moon would have had to have been affected by all of this catastrophism going on, right? You have the Venus event, you have the whole Saturn thing, you have the Jupiter stuff that happened at a certain period of time. And of course, for the 360-day calendar, the Mars event appears to be what throws all of that off. But while all of this stuff is going on, the moon would have had to have been affected. So, if you wanted to use the moon past a certain period of time for calibration of your calendar, you could have only done it during a period where the moon is miraculously rotating around the Earth for 360 days. Now, that number 360 in and of itself is pretty crazy. So first of all, why 360 days? How the heck did 360 line up? A circular orbit, you have 360 degrees in a circle. I mean, those two numbers, the fact that those two numbers show up like that at a certain period of time is unbelievably fascinating to me. And I think there's probably more to it than just luck during all this catastrophe stuff. No, I'm not talking about God. No, I'm not talking about aliens or whatever. If we follow the current evidence that we have, some sort of artificial intervention definitely seems possibly present. And if we go and we read other ancient cultures' histories, yeah, things get even more interesting. All right, anyway, let's keep going. The main point being is that for whatever reason, during a very specific time in history, the moon was used to calculate a year of 360 days. And it's not just one culture. Let's continue with Velikovsky. The month of the Israelites from the 15th to the 8th century before the present era was equal to 30 days, and 12 months comprised a year. There was no mention of months shorter than 30 days, nor of a year longer than 12 months. That the month was composed of 30 days is evidenced by Deuteronomy 34:8 and 21:13, and Numbers 20:29, where mourning for the dead is ordered for a full month and is carried on for 30 days. The story of the flood, as given in Genesis, reckons in months of 30 days. It says that 150 days passed between the 17th day of the second month and the 17th day of the 7th month. The composition of this text apparently dates from the time between the Exodus and the upheaval of the days of Uzziah. Now that's interesting. I guess for you atheist people, it's an interesting talking point. Because this kind of proves that the time period where the Bible was written, and not only that, but it proves that it was influenced by the current time that it was written in, even though it was writing about something that's supposedly divinely given. If that makes sense. If it doesn't, okay, I'll explain better maybe later. And it doesn't matter. You know what? Ignore everything I said. All right. The Hebrews observed lunar months. This is attested to by the fact that the new moon festivals were of great importance in the days of judges and kings. The new moon festival anciently stood at least on a level with that of the Sabbath. As these lunar months were 30 days long, with no months of 29 days in between, and as the year was composed of 12 such months with no additional days or intercalculated months, the Bible exegetes could find no way of reconciling the three figures. 354 days, or 12 lunar months of 29.5 days each, 360 days, or a multiplex of 12 times 30, and 365.25 days, the present length of the year. So basically, the people who are studying this stuff, Bible scholars, they have to actually explain that. And even if you're a believer, I'd actually be curious what your explanation is. I guess, you could say, well, God did it, but there's got to be a little more than that because, I get it. You could say God did everything. I get that. But to explain the actual events and how they happened, I don't think I've ever seen any Bible person discuss or figure this out. I would love to see any of those scholars out there, their work that has to deal with this. Yeah, I wonder. All right, he continues on. The Egyptian year was composed of 360 days before it became 365 by the addition of 5 days. The calendar of the Ebers Papyrus, a document of the New Kingdom, has a year of 12 months of 30 days each. In the 9th year of King Ptolemy Euergetes, or minus 238, a reform party amongst the Egyptian priests met at Canopus and drew up a decree. In 1866, it was discovered at Tanis in the Delta, inscribed on a tablet. The purpose of the decree was to harmonize the calendar with the seasons, according to the present arrangement of the world, as the text states. 1 day was ordered to be added every 4 years to the 360 days, and to the 5 days which were afterwards ordered to be added. I love that. That's perfect. That actually sums this up perfectly. The present order of the world, the present arrangement. They had to deal with this is a real thing that these people back then had to deal with. Whatever happened cosmologically in the sky, whatever Earth went through, it changed everything, including the year. They literally had to hold councils to try to figure out how to get the year back on track for them to track it correctly. You know, these kinds of things are completely ignored by mainstream. It's amazing. The text continues. The authors of the decree did not specify the particular date on which the 5 days were added to the 360 days, but they do say clearly that such a reform was instituted on some date after the period when the year was only 360 days long. On a previous page, I referred to the fact that the calendar of 360 days was introduced in Egypt only after the close of the Middle Kingdom in the days of the Hyksos. The 5 epagomenon must have been added to the 360 days subsequent to the end of the 18th dynasty. We have no mention of 5 days in all the numerous inscriptions of the 18th dynasty. The epigomena, or as the Egyptians called them, the 5 days which are above the year, are known from the documents of the 7th and following centuries. The pharaohs of the late dynasties used to write, "The year in 5 days." The last day of the year was celebrated, not on the last of the epigomena, but on the 13th of Mesori, the 12th month. In the 5th century, Herodotus wrote, "The Egyptians reckon 30 days to each of the 12 months. Add 5 days in every year over and above the number, and so the completed circle of seasons is made to agree with the calendar." The Book of Sothis, erroneously ascribed to the Egyptian priest Manetho, and Gregorius Silenius, and the Byzantine chronologist, maintain that originally the additional of 5 days did not follow the 360 days of the calendar, but were introduced at a later date, which is corroborated by the text of the Canopus Decree. That the introduction of the epigomena was not the result of progress in astronomical knowledge, but was caused by an actual change in the planetary movements is implied in the Canopus Decree, for it refers to the amendment of the faults of the heaven. In his Isis and Osiris, Plutarch describes, by means of an allegory, the change in the length of the year. Hermes, playing at the droughts with the moon, won from her the 17th part of each of her periods of illumination. And from all the winnings he composed 5 days, and intercalculated them as an addition to the 360 days. Plutarch informs us also that one of these epigomena days was regarded as inauspicious. No business was transacted on that day, and even kings would not attend to their bodies until nightfall. The new moon festivals were very important in the days of the 18th dynasty. On all the numerous inscriptions of that period, wherever the months are mentioned, they are reckoned as 30 days long. The fact that the new moon festivals were observed at 30-day intervals implies that the lunar month was of that duration. Recapitulating, we find concordant data. The Canopus Decree states that at some period in the past, the Egyptian year was only 360 days long, and that the 5 days were added at some later date. The Erebus Papyrus shows that under the 18th dynasty, the calendar had a year of 360 days, divided into 12 months of 30 days each. Other documents of this period also testify that the lunar month had 30 days, and that a new moon was observed 12 times in a period of 360 days. The Sothis book says that this 360-day year was established under the Hyksos, who ruled after the end of the Middle Kingdom preceding the 18th dynasty. In the 8th or 7th century, the 5 Epigamica days were added to the year under conditions which caused them to be regarded as unpropitious. All right, we're going to end that here. By the way, unpropitious simply means not likely to be successful. So basically, the new days that were added after the cataclysm that messed up the moon's orbit and messed up the Earth's orbit, they had to deal with the fact that now they had 5 extra days in their year that used to literally never exist. So could you imagine that? Do a thought experiment. Just add an extra, 7 days to your current year right now. So let's just say we get 362 days a year. What would you do? How would that affect society? Everything would change, right? I mean, it's not simple. It's not an easy change. Psychologically, there would be changes as well. So first of all, you'd have to deal with the fact that the way your seasons and time work is going to change. So there's going to be that. Then you're going to have to deal with the fact that you're used to, a very specific year, but now you have 7 extra days in the year. What I find interesting is that people in the past, when this happened, they initially didn't know what to do with the extra days. It didn't work. Their society was not built around a 365-day year. Their society had been built around a 360-day year. So it's interesting that we see all of these cultures back then, when they get new days added to their calendar, they just kind of ignore them, right? They have, right now we explain it as religious reasons or whatever the mainstream wants to say, but psychologically, these civilizations literally didn't know how to directly deal with extra days on their calendar. Now that might sound trivial, but like I said, do a thought experiment. Just think about that. Add a few extra days to the calendar and think what would happen, especially nowadays with our technology and everything being based off of, a solid 365-day year. I mean, that would mess up everything. All right, I'm going to cut it here. We'll get on with the next part in a little bit. But yeah, add some extra days to your year. Do it and just see what happens. It's a good thought experiment.